Hi, everyone. You're listening to Angelneers, the podcast. Who are we? Angelneers is a community for startup builders based in Silicon Valley, where we're talking about building and scaling businesses with industry experts. I'm your host, Oleg Kujakov, and today I'm talking about how to scale teams and revenue with Jeff Gray. Jeff, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Oleg. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you. So, Jeff, you've held senior positions at several startups during high growth periods. Can you tell me a little bit more about those companies and what kind of work you're typically doing?
Sure. I've been a VP of business operations at two different startups. At CoreOS, which was an infrastructure company, a Kubernetes company, for a couple of years, and Domino Data Lab, a data science platform. Both at VP Business Ops, was responsible for a number of functions: finance, HR, customer success, international, and in the early days, lots of other things too, even a bit of engineering as we built up.
Can you tell me a little bit about the companies, like what kind of products you were selling?
Sure. So CoreOS was an open source company. So we started building an operating system that did a couple of things. It ran a Docker container and it could update itself. And some of those ideas and principles were fundamental in the cloud native and container movement. And when Google released Kubernetes, we switched a little bit to become a Kubernetes company. And the product today is the foundation of Red Hat's Kubernetes product after the acquisition a couple of years ago. And Domino Data Lab, we made a platform for data scientists. We sold high up in the organization to companies, big companies that had research going on, maybe in the marketing department and the R&D department, and wanted to centralize research. Before that, I was a consultant for a really long time. Ran a P&L at a systems integrator.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, it sounds like you do a little bit of everything and anything. I was looking over your resume and like your experience lists like marketing, sales, operations, even like you said, engineering. Uh, so I guess what is it you do exactly?
That was a great question. I ask myself that some days as well.
Uh-huh.
I think well. So what I do today is I'm a consultant to a bunch of startups. Usually, I engage right around Series A or just after there's product market fit, when things are starting to get complex, when it
Hmm.
becomes too much for the founder to keep in his or her head, sort
Hmm.
of what everybody's doing, and then at some stage, who everybody is. Um, I started calling this sort of day two biz ops or day two business operations. In the DevOps world, you talk about day one operations, meaning we have to install the software, we have to get it running, we have to get our Hello World application up and running. Day two is about monitoring and troubleshooting and upgrading and managing that whole life cycle. So I sort of tortured the metaphor and moved it over into the business operations space. Talking about that stage of the company where a plan starts to matter, where you're thinking of which leaders to hire when, you have a portfolio of bets you're trying to figure out which to place and when. And I think, and part of this sort of being a jack of all trades, like you say, is I work with companies and help them figure out how to navigate some of that complexity and actually change the way they operate to match that complexity and hopefully keep going just as fast as they ever were.
Yeah, I can't wait to talk about the day two experience. But I just would like to bring in a little bit of my own experience from school, and that is the experience of those like first couple assignments, or really the first assignment you get in any kind of programming involved class, and then everything else. So typically, when you start a class, you have a new software you're working on. You might have a new developing environment you have to install, and this was actually always like the most challenging assignment for me. Was like set it up so that it works. Set up your IDE so that you can hit run and yeah, hello world pops onto the screen. And that was a much different experience than the day two kind of stuff, which is more, building something out, like finding solutions to problems. The setup and the execution stages are very separate. So yeah, we're gonna skip all that setup stuff. We're gonna assume that people listening or people interested have they have the ball rolling, so to speak, and they're more interested in scaling their business than going from 0 to 1.
The metaphor maybe doesn't work perfectly. These things aren't discrete, right? Even in quote unquote day two, there is a ton of discovery. There is a ton of change. I think in general, you're saying, yeah, we're not going to change our market and we're not going to wholly change our product. Or those are very big changes that are sort of hard to increment and hard to MVP. But I think there is a lot of discovery that has to happen, maybe a little bit at a lower level, or discovery that has to keep happening as we figure out, well, we got to this plateau. Great. Now we have to discover and invent how to get to the next one. So they're maybe not quite so discrete and binary. But yeah, mostly I've engaged once we have a product and we generally know who we're selling it to and we've had a little bit of success. That's where I have more experience.
All right. Well, I want to talk about that little bit of success that you mentioned. You were able to increase revenue from 750,000 to $10 million at CoreOS in just a little more than 2 years. What were the key activities and tasks of building that team as you scaled in size and revenue?
So at CoreOS, I think I described the problem statement this way. So when I joined, the company is an open source company. The company had an amazing open source reputation. So there were developers around the world that used our tools to run their applications, and more than that, really believed that the founding team had created something that really spoke to them about the way people should run applications. And so sort of the mission at the highest level was how to use that goodwill and that product success to build a project success, I should say, to build products and a business, and do that without compromising our ideals, and in fact turning off those engineers that were our big advocates. So you know, how we did it is a big subject, but I think that was the mission there. So I think. When I joined, we were just embarking on that journey. We had just launched our first Kubernetes product, and the mission there was to ride the wave of the growth of Kubernetes, which is now more or less the standard if you're building your own platform for infrastructure and you're not just using one of the cloud providers. How to collaborate with Google and other partners in the ecosystem. How to understand what would differentiate us on top of that, and then in the back office, some of the other stuff that I dealt with. How are we going to grow intelligently and grow efficiently?
Can we go back to like when you were starting? How were you able to ride that wave of goodwill and also scale the team?
Yeah, I mean, I can't take any credit for the sort of open source goodwill, but I think it was all about the day one experience. Actually, to go back to that metaphor, is the tool they made an operating system that was so it did something that had been so hard and made it powerfully simple, which was to upgrade your operating system and in fact upgrade your applications. It happened seamlessly in the background for you, as opposed to I have to take my service down or I have to worry about downtime. And so they sort of nailed this problem beautifully and elegantly. And in the way they solved that problem, and there's really really complex systems engineering behind it, was a bunch of other sort of product principles on which they could build other sort of higher level products. And so it was about taking something really simple, taking something really complicated, and making it seem simple and elegant. And then also a sort of great mind for marketing and PR from the founders. I can't take any credit for that stuff though, but it was a great. Once we tried to scale it, it was a great asset to have in the bank.
Right, right. I hear you. It's hard to take credit when so much of the work is done by a team. I guess I want to ask, what were like the main challenges you faced as you were scaling up, and also I would like to say like, yeah, to summarize your point, like a great day one helps that day two, start off on the right foot. Yeah, so I'll just ask again, like, as you're going as you're taking that concept and you're growing, like, what are the challenges that you faced, sort of being in a leadership role? Yeah, what were the roadblocks that you had to knock out of the way?
Yeah, well, there's a bunch of lenses to look at this. Maybe we can start on team and hiring and sort of go out from there, just to kind of focus in. So um, I think when you're taking you're no longer just talking about the sort of the founding team. You're starting to grow next level of leaders. I think every startup founder the knows the sort of cliches. You need to hire people that are much better than you at each individual thing to sort of scale up as you go. I think how to do that and do that well and control spend is really complex. So um, I think sort of one of the challenges there is, do you hire for the job that you have today, the needs that you have today, and the scope that you have today, or do you hire for where you think you can get to? And I think this, like so many things in a startup, this is something where you can mess up on either side. You can ruin your company airing either way. And I think you have to be cognizant of what your biases are and which risks you feel like taking. I think in that one, my bias is almost always hire. Like I will err on hire for the job today. Hire someone that can do the work that I want to build out from the product, especially in a highly technical space. And that gives me the risk of, well, I have to either help or the person has to be able to grow into where we're going, or we have to top them. I still want to take that risk over the other one where we hire a big co-exec and we're not, they can't do what is needed today, or can't do it without more infrastructure than we can or than we want to build at any given time.
Okay, so yeah, so now we're talking about hiring, and that was, you led me right into my next topic. I do think hiring is like the first important thing that we should talk about here,
Sure.
because it is so challenging. So, you kind of already answered my question, but I think you answered my question, but I want to ask, like, who do you hire first, and how? I think you're going to say, like, assess the needs of the company at that moment, and then
It all depends, of course, but sure. Yeah.
but yeah, so yeah, who do you hire first, as a founder CEO when you're trying to scale?
As with all these things, it depends on a number of things. Uh, but I think about it in each sort of function or domain to build out from the product. So in marketing, you need product marketing or developer relations, DevRel first before you hire marketing execs or demand gen, or they're not going to have any content to build stuff around. In sales, you need salespeople who are technical enough to, again, I come from pretty technical products, who are technical enough to demo it on their own. When you start building CS, you need customer success engineers that know the product and can fix stuff. Before you have CSMs, who their job is customer success managers, their job is to manage a process and manage a relationship and manage a renewal. They need engineers to rely on. So, I think that's the way in general, my philosophy is build out from the product. I think also, um, uh, yeah, I think the startups that I've been at and have consulted with, where the mission is really core. It's and people live it and people believe it. It's a huge advantage. So at CoreOS, the mission was about this way to build enterprise or to build infrastructure. At ThoughtWorks, the consulting company I was at, there was a social justice mission that we lived and believed in. And even if both of those turn people off, being super passionate about a thing really, really differentiates you as you're trying to attract these folks to build out from the product.
Yeah, yeah. So as always, you kind of have to read the situation, and that's always going to be your best advice. But I want to talk about like hiring VPs. So at some point in the company life cycle, those people that built the company, the founders and the people they surrounded themselves with, you need to, those builders need to get surrounded with, people that manage the purchasing funnel and also own the sales cycle.
Yeah.
So when is the right time to hire like a VP of sales and a VP of marketing?
I think the rule of thumb in enterprise, the cliche that someone taught me that I actually believe in is once you have two reps at quota, it's time to bring in a VP of sales. I think that
What does that mean for me? Just because I don't really know.
so if you have two salespeople that are selling as much as you think they should sell,
Ah, okay.
then it's okay to hire a VP of sales. A VP of sales, their job, his or her job, is to build the organization, set the patterns, figure out how and when we scale, how and when we sort of seize other opportunities with other channels. In general, you want them focused on that and not on doing the initial deals. In general, they want to see that's there before they join. So your sort of first VP of sales, the rule of thumb is after a couple of your salespeople are doing sort of what you think. I think that again, I think there's a real sort of CEO and management and board decision to be made on when, and who, and how big. A couple times, unfortunately, I've been involved in uh, hires that weren't the right ones for a VP of sales, and it set our company back 6 to 12 months. The time it took to hire, the time it took to onboard, the time it took to learn on either way that we made a mistake, and then do all that again. It is long. It is longer than you think.
You're just making a good point that, as you make those mistakes, not only are you paying for it in the sense that, you're not filling the position you need, but it's like a timing thing where you need time to realize you made a mistake, then you need time to adjust the mistake, you need time to start all over. So it's a big deal for sure.
You probably also waited on some decisions for this leader to come. So let's talk about our hypothetical company that has 2 sales reps performing at expectations.
Right.
You probably waited for your VP to hire the third, because you're like, oh, he or she's going to be better at hiring that than me, so I'm going to wait. Or maybe there was a question on how to engage with a potential channel partner. You probably waited to really engage and figure that out until the VP of sales thinking, great, this expert will be here and I can delegate to him or her.
Hmm.
And so not only did you lose this time, there's decisions you deferred that now are urgent and are going to come due. So it's one of the most high stakes moves you'll make.
Right, right. And those mistakes, they just sound like they compound. I'd just like to point out that to me, like two sales reps performing at quota almost it seems pretty early. But I don't have experience. That's why nobody pays me the big bucks to make these decisions.
Yeah, I just think that once you're above that, how to onboard these folks, how to split up territory, how to price, how to raise your average sales price, what leads, how to make the process more efficient and faster. Those things become top level problems.
Right.
And that is a management job that takes a really capable manager. It's a really important high leverage thing.
Yeah, I mean, you're essentially setting yourself up for the future. Once you have
Yeah.
those two sales guys performing a quota, like, every person you bring in is going to have a huge effect, a huge butterfly effect on like where the organization is going to go. So maybe too early is like not even a thing.
Well, no, I think too early is a thing, and again, I think it depends on the market, right? If you have a transactional thing where most of your deals are self-serve, and people are signing up for $20 a month, that might look like a different team than if you're doing $500,000 deals to big insurance companies. Again, it's gonna really depend on the characteristics.
It's always going to depend. Okay, so let's move from sales to marketing. What key criteria are you looking for when you're hiring a VP of marketing?
Yeah, I worked with a marketing leader at Domino's named Souther Jones. And the first day I met him, he said, "My job is to do deals." And I really love that attitude. Of course, Southern himself didn't directly do deals, but his success was if the sales team did, right? And so I think that's a great attitude and mindset. I also look for someone that is both an operator, so they know how to fluently use all these acronyms and the models behind them, like MQL and SQL, and they know how to do cohort analyses and all that. But also, like, marketing is inherently a creative act in some ways, and so the leader has to be fluent with those operations, but also be able to get writers, designers, engineers to follow them and want to work for them. And so I look for both of those things. So your metrics don't matter if you don't have the substance and the content to fuel them.
Yeah, that's really interesting. This isn't the podcast about hiring, but I just want to ask anyway because you sound like someone with experience. Are there any kind of like any tips or tricks you have when you're hiring someone and you're trying to assess them in those more creative kind of domains?
I think for some of that stuff, like again, for to take the example of a marketer, and will a creative designer or a creative director or a content person follow them? I mean, in part, it's you can handle some of that through reference and back channels. Like
Hmm.
if the VP of marketing isn't for example, designer, but you can find designers who are highly loyal to that person, I think that's a great sign. Uh, and I think you can also ask. I think here's where I do a lot of um, sort of experiential interview questions on uh, trying to find times when they have developed and retained these folks, and not just have theory about it, but actually have messed it up and have learned and come through the other side.
Yeah, great advice. Yeah, experience is always important, and yeah, it's kind of funny that we're here on a podcast talking about the importance of communication and
Indeed.
references and that kind of thing.
That's right. It's all people problems at some point. Yep.
Yeah, at the end of the day, even when you're selling technology. Okay, so so next? Yeah, what are your thoughts about hiring from bigger companies when you're sort of a smaller early stage company?
I did this move. I mean, it didn't come from the world's largest company, but the consulting company I left was 3,000 people, and I went to a startup of 30. And I got advice from an investor when I did it, and he said, it wasn't really advice. It was fortune telling. He said, you're gonna make two different kinds of mistakes, and you're gonna make them both. He said, sometimes you're gonna look at the startup and say, wow, everything's a hot mess, but it's okay because it's a startup, and I'm gonna let it go. And he said, sometimes you're gonna err too far that way, and sometimes you're gonna look and say, wow, everything's a hot mess. I have to go fix it right now. And he said, sometimes you're gonna make that mistake too. And indeed, I have and did make both mistakes, and that advice has stuck with me uh, for a long time now. I think um, the thing where big company people fall down is they expect there to be infrastructure. So if it's in a sales role, they expect there's going to be a department that's going to make their decks and do their competitive analyses, and there is no infrastructure. Like that is half an hour a week of your job or someone else's job, and so you have to get yourself really, really confident that they can do stuff without the infrastructure. And so I'm probably a little more bullish on hiring big company people than many. But I want to hear them say back to me that I want them to demonstrate they truly understand how little infrastructure they're going to have and what that's going to mean for what they need to do. Because if you can get that, the experience of having seen where we're trying to get to is super valuable.
Yeah, such a tight line you got to walk there.
Indeed.
Anyone who's worked in a startup knows that yeah, you are the infrastructure. There is no safety net. If there's something that needs to get done, you pretty much got to do it.
It's also a team sport, right? I wouldn't hire my entire team from Facebook to a 30-person startup, but if I have an entire team of super scrappy startup people, getting one or two big co people in the mix is a good risk to take. It's a team sport, and we don't all have to be individually perfect.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point. Okay, let's move on to sales and SDR teams. I'm interested. I guess the first question here is can you run and this is coronavirus relevant, of course.
Indeed.
Can you run an SDR team remotely?
Well, I think, yeah, the last couple of months of lockdown have shown that yes, you can.
Hmm.
I think I would have said on a spectrum of functions that can be fully distributed to ones that have to be co-located, I would put this more on the co-located end. In general, you have teams of, in general, the people who started SDR roles, not always, they are new to tech and new to sales, and they're doing this to break in. And so, sort of by definition, they've not done this before and they don't have the patterns. Sometimes that is they don't have the patterns for like working in a company or working in a tech company, and they certainly don't have the sales patterns. So, this is where a lot of the team camaraderie and team expectations that you get through co-located can really help. So, I'm never say never, and of course, all these teams are distributed right now. But it's probably one of the last ones I would want to distribute if I had sort of full control of the universe.
Yeah, yeah. Just curious, have you run an SDR team before?
Not directly. I inherited one at one of my startups, and I told the manager, "Yeah, I've never done this before, and we're going to figure it out together." And luckily, she knew a lot about being an SDR, and I knew a lot about being a manager, and we did good stuff. But no, not directly.
Yeah, yeah, not directly, but of course you were sort of managing the person who was managing the team.
Yeah, when you get at some point, you have to learn how to manage stuff you've never done, and yeah, it's better if you've done it, but you can sometimes get by even if it's not a thing you've done.
Well, I might have to call you offline to get some advice on that because
Okay.
I might be running into issues myself. Okay, so we're still talking about SDRs. What's a good way to measure your team productivity?
So I think it has to be kind of subservient to the entire sales team or go to market team's productivity. It has to fit within that model. So for that, you want to use a metric like payback period. Magic number is similar. Payback period says how many months do we have to keep a customer or keep a deal to pay back our sales and marketing costs. Um, saw a report by Meritech that said something like 18 or 20 months was the median for public tech companies. So you have a figure like that, an overall payback period that we're trying to hit. And that includes your SDRs and your marketing team and your sales reps and your sales management and your whatever Salesforce license, all those costs baked in.
Hmm.
Um, so with respect to the SDR, then you have to figure out with your model a bunch of the sort of ratios within that.
Hmm.
Most people plan, and I like to plan off the AE, the account executive, the sales rep as a unit. And so you're looking at what are your ratios there of management. It's going to be something like 7 to 1 of SEs. It's going to be something like 1 or 2 or 3 SEs to each rep, and similar with SDRs. So what's the so how many SDRs do we need to keep these AEs fed with leads? And so when I'm building these plans for companies, start with a baseline of something like 3 SDRs, excuse me, 3 AEs for 1 SDR. So each SDR is supporting 3. If you find that's not working, then you have some things you can try to tweak to stay within that payback period. You can tweak the way you train and onboard your SDRs. You can tweak the content and the messages you do. You can also say, well, I need a different ratio because of my business, and I'm going to make that okay because we're so narrowed on the use case. We're going to have a higher win percentage, or our sales cycle is so short, our ACV is so high or so low, and so you need to. It's good to have benchmarks in the industry of this 18-month payback period or this 3-to-1 ratio of AEs to SDRs, and then there are a million other variables you have to play with to optimize for your business. Yeah,
Sounds like a very complicated type of calculus
uh,
for sales managers.
it is. The arithmetic itself is really easy. I think the I think the important I think that's the dirty secret of SaaS biz ops and SaaS finances. The math is really easy and really common sense. But I think the hard part and the discipline is, uh, well, these are the 10 assumptions we made about our model, and then in a week or a month or 3 months checking and saying, oh well, these 7 were totally wrong. Great, how are we going to, is it okay, and how are we going to adjust? The discipline to do that and the creativity to figure out those adjustments, that's the hard part. The keeping score is relatively easy.
Right. It's the model tweaking, the model building, that's really complicated. So the task for a VP of sales is actually really tough, right? You have to um, essentially, make a model that is accurate enough, and it sounds like a really complicated problem. So my next question for you is, how fast should that VP be delivering on results for his team?
Yeah, it's a bunch of step functions. So almost certainly you should see in the first quarter, you should see a big lift, because there were a bunch of deals the founder or the me or someone with the sales reps was trying to work, and you bring in a VP sales that's done this for 15 or 20 years, and he or she is going to give you a big lift on those deals you've had in flight, the sort of latent people who wanted to spend money with you, but you weren't good enough at selling to collect that money. Probably you're going to see a lift in that first quarter.
Yeah, push them
Then
over the top for that.
that's right. And then that's going to plateau you. And then there's going to be another lift in a couple quarters when the salespeople they brought on, they were able to bring on that you couldn't ramp. And then there's another one where in another few quarters after that, another step change where they lead you into a new geo. And so there's a series of step changes, sort of every couple of quarters, that I would expect. That first one's going to come pretty fast though, because they should be better at selling than you, and should help you get some of that stuff over the line that you never quite could.
Right. You're hiring them for that reason, right?
Yeah,
It's funny. It sounds a lot like lifting weights, and as when you start lifting weights, you experience those like newbie gains. It's like you've
yep,
never weightlifted before, so you start doing this, and boom, it's like, oh, I'm getting kind of immediate results. But then quickly you kind of plateau off that, and you see kind of like step functions. It's like a long period of time where it doesn't really feel like anything's happening, and then you tweak something, and then boom, you go up a step. So I kind of like that as an analogy.
I think that's a reasonable analogy. And your board expects every quarter forever to be a record.
Right.
Um, it's not that growth is not linear and consistent and predictable, right? It is built up of a bunch of things not quite working, and then one does, and it lifts you for a while, and then a bunch of things don't quite work, and then one does, or several do, and it lifts you for a while. And so, yep, I think your analogy for weightlifting is holds true to some extent.
Awesome. So next, let's talk about founders. Typically, they're not like they're builders. They're not exactly trained in finance. Of course, there's exceptions to the rule, but for the general, how should they solve for those kind of problems?
For sort of finance problems specifically,
Yeah, let's start with that.
I
And
mean,
what I mean, can I frame it? I'll frame it one more time.
yeah,
Often you'll talk to a founder. They have an idea that they're really passionate about. They feel it on a human level. They know fundamentally, like, this is the problem. This is what I'm trying to solve, but they don't know exactly the maybe financial ramifications is
yeah,
kind of the right word, or how they have an idea of what the value is, but it's hard to put yourself in other people's minds and see what they're going to see as the value for your company. um,
yeah.
so when you're so close to this thing, how do you bring people in, and how do you start looking at your business as a business and not just your baby?
Yeah, good question. So, super tactically, there are lots of contract CFOs out,
Mhm.
and get one pretty early. Super tactically, I think that a founder who's going to stay the CEO or remain an executive, he or she has an obligation to continue to level up in all domains. So you don't ever have to be as good as finance as your eventual CFO, but you do have to know what to look for with that leader. You do have to have develop a sense of what's a good amount of money to spend or not. You have to get better, just like you have to get better at sales and you have to get better at marketing. And if you don't come from the product side, you have to get better at you have to continue to level up the
Mhm.
entire time you're CEO, or you kind of can't be CEO anymore of a growing company. And so I think the same thing. I think the same thing on the finance side. That said, you can surround yourself with consultants. You can hire leaders. You can rely and trust in those people who have dedicated their careers to this stuff. But I think the best founders I've worked with, they're really great at at that process of leveling themselves up, and they're intentional about it. And they use network, and they use consultants, and they use trial and error. And the founders have longer to sort it out than their people that they hire do. Like, we have to level up. We have to already know it or level up super fast. But they still have a ticking clock where if they can't ever get fluent in finance or in dealing with their customers or whatever, it's really hard for them to stay in the seat.
Yeah, I'd like to point out, like, we're talking about tech here, and tech is always growing and improving. So, the people in charge of tech will also need to do the same.
Yeah,
Uh, that's kind of the beautiful part about technology, right? It's like we're making little incremental changes every day, every week, every hour. So, the people in charge of it kind of got to do that too.
yep.
Let's talk about competition. There's a lot of good ideas out there, and a lot of people trying to solve the same problems. How do you, and how have you been able to pull away from competition when you're kind of running a business, or running a part of a business, managing people, managing teams?
Good question. I mean, I think Peter Thiel would say create a monopoly and just live off that exploit that monopoly. Probably,
Right.
yeah. I mean, I don't know if we want to go down that
Easier said than done, right?
easier said than done. Has all sorts of other societal implications. I think in the early stages, try not to worry about. We try not to worry about competition too much. There's so much we need to do to execute and build a great and differentiated value proposition and build a great company that we try not to index too much on our competitor has XYZ. I think later, other than creating a monopoly and all that, I think the only durable thing you can do is to keep moving fast. So I used to come from the agile software development, lean software development world, and we would talk about cycle time, the sort of duration of time it takes from having an idea to validated feedback. And when your startup is 3 people, that's very fast. When your startup is 100 or 200 or 5,000 people, it's going to take a huge amount of time and focus and energy to keep that time quick, and some infrastructure to do it. And I think that keeping that cycle time down, having a great engineering team on the product side that can do that for your team and your company, I think that's the only durable thing that I am aware of.
Gotta stay hungry.
Hmm. That's
Can't
right.
get satisfied. Yeah. Okay, so we're gonna keep talking about growth, and my next question is about, let me frame it right. the question is, how fast should you grow once you reach $1 million in annual run rate? I I've noticed a trend in a lot of your answers seem to be, you got to find this
Yeah,
middle
yeah,
ground,
yeah.
find the Goldilocks spot. So I guess, yeah, like what's your advice on that? How fast you can grow when you've reached $1 million in ARR?
Yeah, again, I wish I had like a clean, like, well, it's 12.6%, which I wish I had that for you, but I don't. So the way I approach the problem is I think about, well, where do we need to be at some event in the future? And that fundraising is a good example. So not when we run out of cash, but when we have to go talk to investors again, where do we need to be? What revenue do we need to be at?
Hmm.
How much do we want to be spending money at that time? Actually, really just those two things, the ARR and the burn. So, all right, great. So we're at 1 million now, and in 18 months, we need to be at 4 million, and we need to be, our burn needs to be at this. Great. So that's how we constrain this problem. And that's how I know how fast we need to grow. And I usually think about it that way and less about this is the month to month growth I need to sort of achieve escape velocity. It's thinking about it from the company milestones and then breaking that down into a bunch of other assumptions and initiatives and whatever. And that's sort of my operator's perspective on this.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, you're essentially like visualizing yourself in 18 months or whatever it is when you're in
That's
that
right.
meeting. You need to just sort of see like what am I going to be asking for? Where am I going to be at? And then
What story do I want to be telling? That's right. That's right. Yep. Exactly.
okay, so we talked a little bit about ARR. I want to talk about a another fancy acronym here that is probably close to your heart, and that's NPS, Net Promoter Score.
Yeah.
So what is that useful for, and do you pay close attention to Net Promoter Score?
Yeah. So net promoter score is famous survey question, right? On a scale of 1 to 10, how likely are you to recommend this product or service? And you take your nines and tens and subtract your low ones and get the net. And so, yes, we use it. I have to say, I'm a little suspicious of surveys in general too early. When you have 4 customers, go talk to all your customers. When you have 20 employees, don't do employee NPS. Go talk to all your employees. And yes, you're introducing bias. And too often, I think leaders do a survey and sort of tick the box. Oh, I did the survey. I care about my employees or my customers or whatever. And I lump NPS in that as well. So it's like a little bit of a crutch for like actually caring about the thing.
Hmm.
I've seen quite a lot. That said, yes, it's totally valuable. And especially if your go to market is a modern software go to market where it's free to try, where we're relying on word of mouth, or we're relying on it's a freemium SaaS product, or it's an open source product. Yes, it's extremely valuable because you're not getting other signal from these people in terms of money and renewals, and so their usage is a great signal, and their NPS is a great signal for how you're actually doing out there.
Yeah. Okay. So Jeff, you also ran day-to-day operations at Domino Data Labs, as you kind of mentioned here. But as you were doing that as the company was scaling from 4 million to 20 million in ARR.
Yeah.
Kudos, by the way. Uh, but what were the similarities and differences you saw versus your time at CoreOS? As both times you were sort of scaling impressively. What are sort of the general truths there, and then what was different?
Yeah, I think the real difference there was in terms of our the sort of shape of our product and what that meant for the company. So CoreOS, like I said, it was open source. It was developer adopted. We were building off a community of developers and infrastructure folks, and then as their companies needed a platform with various enterprise tools and SLAs behind it, we would try to charge them money. Domino, at least in the time I was there, had a different go to market. It was very top down. We were selling to big insurance companies and big banks that were trying to centralize quantitative research in their organization, and that was a super long sales cycle with a super high average sales price. We would take on complexity risk that we wouldn't have at CoreOS in terms of, sure, we'll install in your crazy custom data center in rural France. Yes, we'll go do that.
Mhm.
Whereas at CoreOS, everything was about our ability to automate, our ability to upgrade, and our ability to standardize it. And so it's not that one is right or wrong, but it's really going to change the shape of your company in terms of the way your plan works, in terms of what kind of team you need to support engineering and implementations. It's going to support it's going to change how you market. And so the form factor of our product in each of those really, really changed sort of a lot about the company and how we needed to work.
Mhm. So that was a lot of differences. How about similarities that you observed, like as you were scaling both companies?
Yeah, sure. I think dealing with enterprises is dealing with enterprises. So these are both enterprise companies, and so the way that they buy, the kind of support they expect, a lot of similarities there. It's going to take longer than you think if you've never done it before
Right.
to deal with these people, to work with these customers and get value in their hands. I think also, sort of similar step changes in the growth of the company, similar inflection points as we went from everyone in the same office to everyone working on the same products to everyone not knowing each other and not knowing each other, and some of the sort of internal communication changes and management changes we need to make at those inflection points. Those felt really, really similar across the two.
Awesome. Okay. Well, thanks for coming on and sharing your experience about those two companies. I think we got
Sure.
like another minute here. Maybe we can talk really quickly about like what you're doing currently with startups and how many of those startups you're working with.
Sure. So thank you. So I've been independent for a bit over a year. I think I've worked with 9 different startups. A couple of them have done relatively long-term interim roles in finance or in sales operations, or in fact in sales. And then I've also done sort of advisory or project or project work. Hey, how can we work with enterprise customers, or what should our strategy for customer success be? And so it's been great. Someone who's was a systems integrator until I joined Silicon Valley 5 or 6 years ago. It's been a great way to have some impact and get a bunch of at bats and really accelerate my learning. So it's been fun, and I feel like I'm contributing to these companies.
Awesome. All right. Well, you sound like an awesome person, Jeff. If people want to get in touch with you to get some more of your expertise, what's the best way to reach you?
You can find me on Twitter, Jeff Gray, GraySF. So Jeff Gray SF on Twitter.
All right. Thank you. Okay, guys, we're going to end it there. Thanks to Jeff for sharing your experience and insights. I
Thanks,
think
Oleg.
this one, yeah, of course. I think this one will be highly valuable for people that are going to be scaling businesses soon. So, again, thanks, Jeff. It was great having you.
Take care.
All right. Bye.